Welcome back to the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, which is still very much open for business as Ohio State prepares for the Cotton Bowl Classic. Still alive in the college football playoff. That is a semifinal showdown with Texas a week from today, which is a Friday, I'm told. These are snap judgments. That's Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. Buckeyes got back. They left the Rose Bowl on Wednesday, and Ryan Day immediately jumped into 2 hours of film study on what happened against Oregon, and then spent the rest of the flight looking ahead to Texas. So there was no actual celebration for the head coach at Ohio State, but he is deep in to the ball right now.
I think probably rewatching a game where you kick the crap out of the number one team in the country feels like a celebration.
Okay.
Maybe he's got a little bowl of peanuts there. It's New Year's Day. Maybe there's a glass of champagne. You never know. He could be enjoying himself as he breaks down that film. But then it was on to Texas. We talked a little bit about with him on Friday. I thought it was a very illuminating look into Ryan Day's mindset in this playoff. You asked a good question about how he spends his time after that game. And I thought it was very interesting that he said he doesn't want to waste those moments in the immediate aftermath of a game when you're probably still like in your football frame of mind. You're feeling good about what you guys have just done. So you watch your previous game and you get right onto the opponent, because he said oftentimes those best ideas for your game plan, even one where the game is, I guess it's about a week away, it's more or less normal. That's when you kind of formulate perhaps your best thoughts on the next game plan, is in the immediate aftermath after the next one. And it was also an indication that Ryan Day spending a decent amount of time on ball this time of year, which is good.
Yeah, and he said, I know that it perked up your ears a little bit. He had mentioned and talked about not having to maybe be as fully fledged into the CEO role in the playoffs. And I don't know to what extent I believe that to be true. Probably not 100, because the portal is open, roster movement coming and going. We saw earlier on Friday a bunch of the early enrollees for Ohio State already out here getting some workouts in. So there's still a bunch of things for him to manage. Although at the end of the day, ultimately, we all know he's going to be evaluated and judged by what happens against Texas, and he knows that, which is why I think there's no getting on that plane and cracking a beer. It's like, all right, here's 5 hours of opportunity to look at a film before going. And he said getting 2 or 3 hours of sleep to come right back into this building on Thursday, and then Ohio State turns the page and starts dialing up practice and all that stuff today, Friday, and moving on for next week. But I guess that shouldn't come as a surprise that that's the way that a competitive, high-achieving head coach would operate. But it is still maybe a better glimpse into the process and the mindset for him than we tend to get.
He said this time of year is about ball, and I think that's right, because the recruiting class is in the barn, right? And they got most of their transfer commits, So I don't know how much roster management stuff's going on right now. Like, I think it helps, obviously, that they're still playing. Like, as soon as the season ends for a team, like we saw Tennessee after team went to the portal as soon as they lost to Ohio State. So there'll be more of that, I guess, on the other side of whenever this ends. But I think in the moment, I don't know if to make up a number out of thin air, if 30% of his time can be dedicated to like hardcore scheming up ball plays in the regular season, maybe it's more like 70% of his time now. It did seem to me like there was a bit of a difference in his reality this time of year than there is in the regular season. And he said, that's what I love. Like, I love the nitty gritty schematics in all three phases, but I think it is very apparent on the offensive side of the ball that Ryan Day has had his hands all over the passing game from what we've seen from Ohio State in these last two games. And I think it's yielded obviously excellent results for the offense. He and Chip Kelly kind of working in concert, Chip with the run game, Ryan with the passing game, marrying the two together has worked really well for Ohio State. So I don't know if this was the design or if maybe they just got to this point of the year and Ryan Day figured out that he could be more involved. Maybe coming off the Michigan game, this changes needed to happen. I'm not sure. I'm not trying to make too much of it, but I did find it very, it hit my ears, as you said. I got perked my ears up a little bit that he said that, because I've just felt that way in these two games, that it looks more like Ryan Day's passing attack against Tennessee and Oregon that maybe we saw during the regular season.
Yeah, and having a healthy, confident, knowledgeable Will Howard helps with that as well. I mean, what you're watching, I think, is the very best version of Ohio State's offense and the very best version of what Ryan Day's impact can be on that. He said, as you mentioned, he's doing what he loves. I can't help but feel, especially leaving 2 nights ago from the Rose Bowl and talking to a Jack Sawyer or a Mecca Ibuka, and the way that they were taking time to soak in that victory, even everybody, like Josh Fryer scooping up confetti, I don't think that this is lip service when Ohio State is talking about earning the opportunity for another week to play together, to wear the jersey together. I am watching them have a level of enjoyment that I don't always see from Ohio State, or that we rarely see from them in some respects. And they definitely weren't feeling that a month ago. So I think that the turnaround in emotion, and I guess execution fuels that.
I've heard that said a time or two.
They really seem to be embracing a different mentality, a different opportunity, a different level of enjoyment. Ryan Day called it like embracing the process. And I think that's something that you have seen from someone like Caleb Downs and Denzel Burke, Lathan Ransom. They would be outside after every single Wednesday practice throughout the season. I know that they take this thing very seriously, but I think it's the marriage of that professional approach with a reminder that they are, college-age kids that should be taking some moment to appreciate what they're doing. I think they've got that balance struck pretty well right now. We'll see if that's 2 games. They still have to do that twice more. But I know that not everybody loves when we get into the vibes on snap judgments, but yeah, there's something in here right now. We know when it's wrong, and I feel like we can point out when it feels right.
Yeah, and I think it's encouraging too that it feels like that's what they're holding on to at this moment, right? Like Ryan Day said, a lot of people were counting us out before the playoff, and now that sentiment has changed where they can't let that affect their process. They can't let that affect what's motivated them through these first 2 playoff games, which there's a measure of revenge against Oregon. There's a measure, a pretty big dose maybe of getting a bad taste out of your mouth against Tennessee. But I think the consistent thing through both those games now after the Rose Bowl is that motivation to want to keep playing together, like understanding that perhaps they are on the precipice of doing something special and something that's never happened in the sport before. It's the reason they changed a street name out here when Ohio State won the national title in 2014, right? They were the first to do something, and they want to be the first to do something again. So I have sensed some, I don't know if concern is the right word, but a little bit of worry, a little bit of curiosity from just the fan base about what happens now that Ohio State probably isn't perceived as the underdog. But by anyone moving forward, they are a prohibitive favorite to win the national title after what they did in the first 2 rounds and how that might affect the team. I don't think it will, because I don't think that's what they've been motivated by necessarily.
Yeah, they're still in the playoff, and they're going to be I don't think there'll be any shortage of motivation no matter what, because of they're chasing a national championship. And, they said that all along, the natty or bust mentality. Like, they're in the midst of that now. I don't think they would lose sight of that. But I think there's also probably some part of this where the depth of outrage, emotion, frustration, again, that would depend on who exactly we're talking about, how that applies. But just the level of scrutiny that Ohio State was under after November 30th, and their ability to close off that outside noise as best they can. But it got through, and they were feeling it more than anybody. They lost the game that they wanted to win. They wanted gold pants. It didn't happen. They wanted to get to the Big Ten championship. It didn't happen. I think as much as they've talked about moving on, something that Will Howard and Jack Sawyer said immediately after, well, these scars are going to be there, but we have to move forward. So I don't think that they would just get over that part. I think they've channeled that loss and that setback and everything else into something different, and they're still remembering, because it was only 5 weeks ago that no one believed in them at all. I don't think that they're as likely to just, well, now we're betting favorites. Everything's figured out. It's probably much more difficult to let go of that part of it, and they probably shouldn't, because it has fueled their 2 best performances of the year without question.
Yeah, it had. No, and look, there's plenty of okay, you didn't believe in us, don't switch up all of a sudden on us too. Like they're 18 to 24-year-olds, I guess. Like they'll I'm sure they can harbor or continue to cultivate that sort of mindset in the coaching staff too. Even if they're not expressly saying it, I still think that lingers even as they're playing very well, and everyone thinks they're going to beat Texas and win the national title now. That was another thing that Ryan Day said that I thought was interesting. He said it in passing. he was asked about, again, the comparisons between this playoff structure and what happens in the NFL. And he mentioned the New York Giants in 2007. I was like, look, I was reminding myself of what happened that year. They were 10-6. They had lost like 2 of 3 going into the playoff, and they ended up winning the Super Bowl. But prior to that year, everyone wanted Tom Coughlin fired. And then I think Tom Coughlin was like coming under some heat at the end of that year. And Ryan Day mentioned that part of it specifically, that Tom Coughlin, I think he said, was like in a bad way. And then the New York Giants turned around and won the Super Bowl. And I was like,
what does he know about that?
Do you think you're Tom Coughlin in this scenario? And it's like, I'm not trying to psychoanalyze the man, but like, I think he understands that, you know, they screwed it up pretty royally on November 30th. And this was a season that was meant to be at the point that it is right now. It got there in a very different pathway, and in a pathway that I think had people rightly questioning, you know, Ryan Day's constitution to get Ohio State to this place. So I think he's taken that on as a challenge, clearly, because it's gotten him to coach the best he's coached in his career in these last 2 games.
So as we start to turn the page from the Rose Bowl to the Cotton Bowl next week and the matchup with Texas, I think I counted 5 questions about Quinn Ewers. Is that going to continue, you think? Is that going to overshadow everything else about this game? And I'm not saying that it shouldn't. This was one of the highest, rated prospects Ohio State ever signed. He was here for 1 year. He played 3 snaps, just 3 of the most electrifying handoffs that you're ever going to see.
I'll never forget him.
You and I were already talking about him. We were watching the Arizona State game, and we've certainly followed his career and everything else. You can come behind us, Quinshawn. It's fine. I'm curious what it's going to look like, what that conversation is going to be like, how he's going to play. His career trajectory, I think, has been fascinating. Ohio State was not really involved in that, and there's going to be more. I wonder if Ryan Day is going to come up with a stock answer for what the conversations were like that December as Quinn Ewers left, because he's, I think, going to be continued to be asked about this all the way up until kickoff.
I think you more or less said it on Friday, which was like, Quinn wanted to start and he wasn't going to take CJ Stroud's job, right? I think it's as simple as that. There's just, I've seen over the past couple of years this conversation about like, oh, I can't believe Ohio State chose Kyle McCord over Quinn Ewers. They didn't. They chose CJ Stroud over Quinn Ewers.
They shockingly chose the Heisman Trophy finalist.
Yeah. So like that, I mean, that's all it has to be. And Ryan Day, like I said, like there's people here in the Woody that still have good relationships with Quinn, and they saw a few special traits in him when they offered him as an 8th grader, and always knew he was going to be a good player. And I think he's more or less backed that up in his career in Texas. It was just a weird situation, weird timing when he decided to enroll early. CJ Stroud became the best quarterback in college football. Of course, he wasn't going to lose that job to Quinn Ewers, and Quinn didn't want to sit around. Like, I get that too. It's like, that's the nature of the position. So it was just kind of a lose-lose situation for all parties involved once that decision was made to enroll early. And I think it's fine, because I think both teams ended up in a good place in the end of it. So it'll get asked about more. I guess the one good thing about it is it's not a traditional bowl setup where we're going to have like the full team media days and stuff like that. So Quinn, I'm sure, will talk at least a time or 2 before that game, and he'll get asked about it. I'm sure it'll come up again when Ryan Day and Steve Sarkisian hold their press conference on Thursday in Dallas. But thankfully, we don't have a month of Quinn Ewers playing against Ohio State.
Yeah, that would get old real fast, but I think that has been one of the real perks. Again, Ryan Day mentioned that on Monday before the Rose Bowl. They're like, you don't have to go do a bunch of the extra events. Ohio State will travel to Dallas on Wednesday evening. I think they're going to get their full practice here, then get on the plane. So that really they don't have to do extra stuff. They don't have to do shenanigans, and they get to keep this as close to a normal process as they would normally have, which I think is great. They've really loved that part. Makes you wonder why we did it any differently for the last 100 years, but that's neither here nor there. I think that they like that setup. I think the practice schedule, Ohio State really likes the way that this has worked out, and the fact that they got to play in that first round game and get some of that momentum is what Ryan Day talked about. So they will have us back in here on Sunday. We're going to talk to 7 or 8 players, Buckeyes on both sides of the football. So that'll be the next time that we are in the Woody, and we'll have some snap judgments after that. And then it'll be on to Dallas, which we'll get there on Wednesday night. We'll have some availability with Jim Knowles and Chip Kelly. But everything else that you've come to expect will be right there in the middle on Kings of Columbus, Kings of the North, and on the podcast YouTube channel. These, though, They're snap judgments. He's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again on Sunday.